Welcome to Conversation with Iris, the podcast series on migration, displacement and mobility produced by the Institute for Research into Superdiversity at the University of Birmingham. I'm Stefano Piemontese, a Marie Curie Research Fellow working on youth mobilities, race and inequality in Europe. And today I have the great pleasure to converse and to talk with Karolina Nikielska-Sekula and Amandine Desille about their co-edited book, Visual Methodology in Migration Studies, New Possibilities, Theoretical Implications, and Ethical Questions. The book has been published in summer 2021 in the Springer IMISCOE Research series. Karolina is a teaching assistant at the Institute of Regional Studies, Jagiellonian University, Krakow. Amandine Desille is a postdoctoral research fellow in local governance of migration at the University of Bordeaux, and also an associate member of the Institute of Geography and Spatial Planning at the University of Lisbon. So the goal of your book is to explore the use of visual methods in migration studies. The chapters that make up this collection present a variety of cases that reveal the multiple benefits and also the ethical dilemmas of using visual methodologies in research with migrants. Because in the introduction, you place the book somehow in continuity with social science research tradition that emerged after the visual and sensory turn. To begin with, I would like to ask you if you could better explain to non-expert what these ontological turning points are about, if we may call them in that way.
Yeah, visual turn, we talk usually about visual turn as something that has started around 1990s. And this is actually a shift from some domination of the textual explanations towards the recognition of the visual that can communicate kind of for itself. So we recognize this ability of pictures to talk without textual information.
At least that was like what we thought at the very beginning when we started editing the book. And then while editing the book, reading through the chapters, we felt that we could go even further and that we could actually support the assumption that the visual turn is accompanied by the sensory turn. So what's new here is that the act of seeing is not pure, as Susan Ball has put it. So the researcher, she will activate her hearing, her touch, her smell, her taste while doing research, and according to her own positionality and what she's done before, the kind of experiences that she had before, these sensorial experiences will further project on the data collection and on the interpretation.
I was thinking that for many people who haven't yet experimented with visual or multisensorial approaches, it is not really clear what are we talking about when we refer to visual methods. How does it work in practice? Is it about making videos or photographs while doing fieldwork, or there is something more?
Well, let's start with what we actually mean by the visual. Visual, as Banksy and Morphy suggested, is what is visible, observable, what we can experience, rather than what is intellectual, produced only by our mind. And we've framed the visual a bit more tightly in our book. We defined it as, and here I'm quoting actually from the book, process that results in humans producing visible objects, reflexivity, constructing their visual environment and communicating by visual means. And in our book, the contributors refer to visuals as produced either by the researcher or by the researcher in collaboration with professionals, artists, or participants. In the book, we explored three main media, as you already mentioned a bit, Stefano: film, photographs, and mental maps.
So I'm trying to follow the path of someone who is approaching the methods for the first time. And I would say that once we decide to employ visual methods in our research, we often find ourselves lost or in despair because no one has ever told us how to use them, right? And the word of academia, of social sciences, is also a logocentric word. Everything is about writing and speaking. So I was wondering, how can these approaches become part of research methodologies that are logocentric? And more in general, what is the purpose of producing or co-producing visuals in our research?
Well, we need to recognize that this division between epistemological division between Cartesian and phenomenological approach to acquire knowledge and approach to the reality. So the question is whether we process the reality through our minds, and is it only the minds, that's it, or is it something else to the intellectual incorporation of knowledge? And we believe that that the intellectual extends also to the embodied knowledge, to the bodily experiences that we collect through just being in the field, interacting in the field. We can smell the field, we can see it, we can hear it, and all this also contributes to the way we understand it. We recognize some places as familiar because of our positionality, some other as maybe dangerous, maybe exotic to us. And this all produces projects on our research interests, as well as our interpretation of the data that we are collecting. So our claim is that we cannot separate the sensory from the intellectual.
The idea is that we want it to be clear that it's not just a background. It's just like, okay, well, we're recognizing that we have, senses, and that when we arrive in the field, it kind of defines the way we see things. No, how is that data? How can we add to our data set and make data thicker throughout recognizing that we also collect through our experience and our body? And so we are adding layers here. It's not just the intellectual process, but actually we have a new set of data that we're bringing in, that we're systematizing, and that we are analyzing with the rest of our corpus.
Can you provide some example of how we can collect and analyze data using these methodologies? Yeah. Maybe you can draw on your own research on some of the work of your authors.
Yeah, I've been using a lot of photography in my research, researcher-generated photography through city walks. I also used something that is called respondent-generated images. I asked respondents to bring images to the interview. This is called photoelicitation. And these techniques of both collecting data yourself and collecting data, visual data from your respondents, it gives a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. The challenge is that usually amount of data that is produced, the layers that Amandine mentioned in relation to senses, but also here in relation to the data that we collect, they are really numerous, but it gives us in turn the very nice density of the research and very in-depth description of the field.
I, for my part, I'm playing around a little bit with ethnographic film. So the first film that I shot at the time, it's 17 minutes length, and I had 4 or 5 hours of shooting. So it's not that, it's not that you shoot all the time and then you see hours and hours of visuals that you interpret them all. I mean, not in my case, at least. So what was happening was more that I would do field work, maybe shoot some research images, but mostly do a back and forth between this experience and intellectual processes. So writing down, rewriting a possible scenario, finding the right event to jump in and start getting authorization from the participants, and then start filming. And then after looking at all those footages to edit and make it more coherent. In the book, we have a great chapter by Sanderine Verstappen that works on jumping between film, writing, editing, back to writing, back to editing, and just like alternating between those different persons that, you know, the researcher, the filmmaker, and sometimes the participant.
I was thinking that, of course, like one of the reasons why scholars recently are more likely to engage with audiovisual methodologies is, on the one hand, that it is just easier, right, to produce visuals compared than in the past. We all have our smartphone. There is a whole digital infrastructure that allows us to produce and share different typologies of material formats and so on. But then, of course, there is also this idea or expectancy that using photography, movies, visual maps can help scholars, their research questions, their results to impact a wider audience. You don't need a training sociology to read a documentary movie or to read some images. No? So the question is, well, is it a well-founded belief, or is just a naive dream? And what is the role of research participants in this process?
For sure, images can make a faster and bigger impact in our visually oriented society. But exactly because of that, whether to release visual data is a question of ethics.
Indeed, we did have this discussion many times, also with other participants, both about the existing of images with or without the context. That do they need the context to exist? Can they speak on their own without the context? What are the dangers of that, especially in the field that we are dealing with? That's the one thing. Another thing is what we have to publish, what we can publish, what we should not publish, and whether we actually collect visual data to publish them. That's the question. Is doing visual methods meant to publish something, or to just intensify the collection of data? For me, while working with photography and rather in academic than artistic field, I believe that I don't have to publish anything from my research. I can, but I don't have to. And I make decision on what to publish and what to not according to the best interest of my respondents. Sometimes it's me making decisions that probably the respondents would not make themselves. Sometimes it's me stopping myself from publishing something that that for the respondent is not exactly problematic. And here, another question that Lush Fresh came up with in our book is the question of colonial approach. Whether is it my position actually to decide for them and to protect someone if someone wants publication of certain data or not. So so visual data raise a lot of ethical questions on very different dimensions involving both well-being and agency of the participants, and how to balance it. And there is no ready answer, I would say, for that.
There was already there was also a fantastic discussion when we had the second panel, where we started to work towards this topic with Patricia Piretu Blanco. And she came up with the idea of the right to be forgotten, or the right to disappear. So also, how long are we supposed to store this visual data? So it's not only do we publish or not, like Karolina was saying, do we release or not, do we select or not, but also how long do we keep that on the cloud, in our drives? And can people move on without their images, you know, being stuck with us?
There is another debate that you address in your book, in the introduction in particular, which is the question of objectivity and truth, and more in general, the relation between art and science. So of course, when social scientists start using visuals in their research, they might have the feeling to operate halfway between these two words that appear to be in opposition, no? The world of science, where the truth is achieved or revealed, and the world of art, where fantasy and imagination are performed. In your introduction, you argue that drawing a line between the art and science is not possible. I mean, it's impossible. And we should instead move beyond this opposition. Am I right? Can you make an example of how we can embrace these two faces of the same coin in our practice?
And so what really interested me in that debate is the idea that art doesn't need to be contextualized, whereas research needs to be contextualized. What we understood while diving into this literature, talking with Karolina and with the other authors, is the importance of context and the importance also of remembering that we are addressing questions that are in the social science domain. So to always, back to this idea of back and forth, no, it's not that it cannot be art, it's just that we are scientists, and so we are asking questions that are in social science and trying, even if we use the visual or other sensory media, we are trying to produce knowledge, right? And not just touch people.
You state in your introduction that there is somehow a problem with images. No, images are not neutral, no, in the sense that they convey specific meanings. They are not objective in the sense they are fabricated by different subjectivities, and they are also ambiguous, no, because in the sense they are contextual and open to interpretation. And that's why, no, you highlighted how the context is important to understand and give images a meaning. When it comes to art, misinterpreting the message of a performance is an audience problem, right? It doesn't affect the life of other people. And actually, the reason why art manages to keep its autonomy from the political sphere is precisely because of this ambiguity, right? While when we conduct migration research, the opacity of images is problematic because at the end of the day, representation about migrants shape the imageries we have about migration, and these imageries influence the way policies are designed, and the policies seriously affect the lives of people. So in a way, there is also a responsibility of journalists, people working in the media, but also artists, but also scholars when they deal with when they try to visualize the phenomenon we are talking about, migration. Yeah, well, they have a responsibility. And when I was reading your book, an example came to my mind, which is the famous photo of Massimo Sestini. Yeah, he won the second prize in the 2015 WordPress photo contest, and is the famous photo of the crowd of refugees on board on a boat crossing the Mediterranean, right? This picture has been used several times by far-right Northern League Italian party for their propaganda, right? And yesterday, when I was preparing this conversation, I found an interview that Massimo Sestini gave to La Repubblica 1 year ago, where he said that photo aimed at giving a face to the exodus of men and women, but ended up in the vortex of disinformation and ignorance. So there are risks inherent in using images when conducting migration research. Can you tell us something about these risks, these dilemmas that we as scholars are expected to face when we engage with these methodologies?
Yes. When writing a book, the whole process took place after the 2015 humanitarian crisis, so we could have observe shifting narrations, visual narrations on migration representation and how it went, and it became a part of our book as well. And we found out that there were two main narrations, visual narrations of refugees and migrants trying to get to Europe. One produced by a humanitarian organization that implied a kind of victimization of migrants and refugees. And the other one that was connected to far-right political parties that presented migration as a threat. And as you said, sometimes one picture could serve both purposes at the same time. And here the question of the context and the visuals that we produce as visual scholars come back. I think that our responsibility is not to contribute to any of those narrations, to provide a counter narration that includes the voice of migrants, people on the move themselves, right? So that's why we really need to be careful how we publish, where we publish, and what context we give, and what are the consequences, what can the consequences of not publishing, of publishing certain pictures can be. Can they fuel into some approaches, humanitarian or far right or not? But in the same time, we never have a control over the images that we produce and publish. So we should have it in our mind, but it's not that we can control it fully.
The problem also is that it's very hard to shake our imaginary, even for us. I mean, like, we also have a visual culture around migration. And so those representation of refugees in boats, it's like, you know, it's since the so-called boat people in the 70s, and it's really hard for us to shake. And there is this great article about the Walnut collection that shows refugees from the Soviet Union at the time going to the US. And so they're in the boat, and it looks like a family album. It's like people are together, dressed up, they take pictures, they're smiling. And so this scholar that presents the Walnut collection at conferences, every time people in academic venues tell her, but they're not refugees, they're smiling and they're not, you know, just like a bunch of people in a boat. And so one of the chapters that was really interesting for me to read also when we got the first draft was the one by Vlad Nomescu and Clara Tresheni. They were trying in a participatory process to shake this idea of a generic migrant, a migrant that we have the whole imaginary around this person, where because it's usually a he, where he should be, how he should look like, and so here there is something really interesting about the work of a filmmaker together with an anthropologist, together with people that have experienced migration and have claimed asylum, on like how to debunk a little bit this imaginary, right, and get out of the boat metaphor.
By way of conclusion, I wanted to ask you probably the most important question, which regards the relevance of visual methodologies for migration studies. In your book, you suggest, as Karolina has said before, that using visual approaches enable us with new ways of accessing and producing knowledge that is transformative, because it may counter the harmful hegemonic representation of migrants and migration. Amandine, you just did an example of how Vlad and Clara try to address this question, talking about the generic migrant figure, I guess. This is the expression they use. So my question would be, what is the epistemological value of visual methodologies in the specific field of migration?
What we want to unsettle is that it's not all about, structure and what is, out of us, but by recognizing the experience and the experience of people that have migrated, then this is how it can be transformative. So I'm thinking, for instance, about Cesar's Macari chapter, where he himself worked in a night market with migrant workers, And so he has embodied like night work, but he also puts a GoPro, ask people to wear a GoPro while they work, so that really you see things from their perspective. And I think this is also what makes it very different here, that the experience of the person themselves is where we start thinking about producing knowledge.
When you were talking, it came to my mind, well, the chapter of Karolina Augustova, right? She also gives us an opportunity to grasp an embodied experience of what she calls the game, what the refugees call the game. Her chapter is about the crossing of the border on the Balkan Road. She didn't take pictures herself, she collected the pictures from the respondents. They showed her their own pictures from the process. You can see the injuries. You can see empty beds in refugee camps that belonged to people who lost their lives during the game. And reading this chapter and watching these pictures is really touching. It actually really speaks to emotions and gives us this kind of, we can participate and share this embodied experience of being in that situation, in that danger. It gives me goosebumps anytime I read it. Actually, even now when I'm talking about it.
And this is how the book is articulated in that sense: is that we are pushing forward the experience, and experience that is embodied, but it also grounded in place. And so one of the sentences that we wrote in the introduction is this idea that we are trying to escape the image of a floating migrant person that is not attached to anything. No, like there are people that live in places that, so the experience is grounded in place. And then when we think about how to tell this experience, to do justice to the complexity of lives, of the contradictions that are only human, then like, how do we do that? How do we go into storytelling? And storytelling is not something that is unknown to researchers. Like, we do storytelling even when we write completely scientific articles that are published in journals. I mean, there is here always a story that we're saying. Then how can we do all this together with people that have experienced migration? And well, it's true that most of us contributors have also experienced migrations, but like it's a rather privileged experience. So how to include people that have like different experiences of migration. And finally, what do we put out there? Like, this is the last kind of question that ties the book together, is like, what kind of representations of migration do we contribute to with all these visuals when we release, not when we decide to keep them close to us, but yes.
Yeah, and actually you have decided to structure the book in a way that reproduce these 4 dimensions. So we have a section on places and bodies. Then we have a second section on storytelling, a third section on participation, and the 4th section on representation. And I really appreciated to find at the end of each section a conclusion, like a sum up and an interpretation, of the 3 chapters that make up each section. So before saying goodbye, I wanted to mention again that the book is available online and is open access, which means that everyone can download it for free and read it and enjoy. And so we are looking forward to follow your work, and we will, Iris, we'll keep our friends posted about your new activities and publication in the field of visual methodologies in migration studies.